I have to say, I personally believe that the timing could not be any better to have Congressman John Lewis here. With tensions in the country running high and individuals looking for guidance, I believe Congressman John Lewis is the perfect person to hear from at this time. Congressman Lewis served as chair of the SNCC, or Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, when he was a student at Fisk during the Civil Rights Movement, and led several marches, including the march across the Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, which is known today as Bloody Sunday. Serving in the United States Congress, Congressman Lewis has made his lifelong goal to fight for civil and human rights for all. A true champion for us all, please welcome Congressman John Lewis.
Good morning. I'm delighted, very happy, and very pleased to be here at Google. Thank you so much. You look good. Thank you, Harry, for those kind words of introduction. I'm happy and pleased to be here with my co-author, Andrew Iden. It was his idea that got me involved in this effort, and we're so grateful that you would allow two guys who were one born in Atlanta, one in rural Alabama, to come from the South. Andrew would tell you that I've been his congressperson since he was only 3 years old. So the people in Georgia have been very good to me. Now, I didn't grow up in a big city like Atlanta. I grew up in rural Alabama, 50 miles from Montgomery. My father was a sharecropper, a tenant farmer. But back in 1944, when I was only 4 years old, and I do remember when I was 4, my father had saved $300, and with the $300, he bought 110 acres of land. My family still owns this land today. On this farm, we raised a lot of cotton and corn, peanuts, hogs, cows, and chickens. I'll be very frank and very honest with you. I didn't like working out in the field. I didn't like being out in the hot sun. And I did everything possible to escape working in the field. I used to say to my mother, when I would fall behind picking cotton or gathering peanuts, she would say, "Boy, catch up. You're lagging behind, catch up." And I would say, "This is hard work." And she would say, "Boy, hard work never killed anybody. It won't kill you." I said, "Well, it's about to kill me." So during my early days in school, especially middle school, I would get up early in the morning, pack my book bag, and hide under the front porch and wait till the school bus come along to get off to school. Somehow I discovered that education was important. Now, you heard me say earlier that we raised a lot of chickens. I know here at Google, you're just smart, I can tell. But do you know anything about raising chickens? You know something about raising chicken, brother? Not much.
I was, my grandmother's farm.
Okay, well, why don't we compare notes here?
We used to grab the eggs, we the kids, we just run in there and grab the eggs.
Let's just compare notes here, and let's have fun here. Well, on the farm, really, it was my responsibility to take care for the chickens. And I became very good, really good at raising chickens. When the setting hen was set, I would take the fresh eggs, mark them with a pencil, place them under the setting hen, and wait for 3 long weeks for the chicks to hatch. You may be saying, "Now, John Lewis, why did you mark those fresh eggs with a pencil before you placed them under the setting hen?" Well, from time to time, another hen would get on that same nest. And there would be some more eggs, fresh eggs. Had to be able to tell the fresh eggs from the eggs that were already under the setting hen. Do you follow me? Okay, good. When the little chick would hatch, I would food the setting hen, I would cheat on the setting hen. I would take these little chicks and give them to another hen. I put them in a box with a lantern, raise them on their own. I was never quite able to save $18.98 to order the most inexpensive incubator or hatchery from the Sizzler bookstore. Most of you in here are so young, you don't know anything about the Susan Roebuck catalog, do you? You really do? Really? That big book? That thick book? That heavy book? Some people call it the wish book. I wish I had this. I wish I had that. So I just kept on wishing as a little boy. But as a little child, I wanted to be a minister. I wanted to preach the gospel. So from time to time, with the help of my brothers and sisters and cousins, we would gather all of our chickens together in the chicken yard, like you're gathered here in this room. The chickens, along with my brothers and sisters and cousins, would make up the audience, the congregation. And I would start speaking or preaching. And when I look back on it, some of these chickens would bow their heads. Some of these chickens would shake their heads. They never quite said amen. But I'm convinced that some of those chickens that I preached to during the 40s and the 50s tended to listen to me much better than some of my colleagues listen to me today in the Congress. And some of those chickens were just a little more productive. At least they produce eggs. So that's the chicken story. And that's enough of that story. But when we would visit the little town of Troy, or visit Montgomery, visit Tuskegee, visit Birmingham, I saw those signs that said white men, colored men, white women, white waiting, colored waiting. And I didn't like it. To go downtown to the theater on a Saturday afternoon, all of us little black children had to go upstairs to the balcony. All of the little white children went downstairs to the first floor. I would come home and ask my mother, my father, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, why? And they would say, that's the way it is. Don't get in the way, don't get in trouble. But one day I heard about Rosa Parks, 15 years old in the 10th grade. I heard the words of Martin Luther King Jr. on old radio. The action of Rosa Parks, the words and leadership of Dr. King inspired me to find a way to get in the way, to get in what I call good trouble, necessary trouble. So in 1956, at the age of 16, with some of my brothers and sisters and cousins, we went down to the public library in the little town of Troy, Alabama, trying to get library card to check out some books. And we were told by the librarian that the library was for whites only and not for colors. I never went back to that library, to that building, until July 5th, 1998, for book signing of my first book, Walking with the Wind. And hundreds of blacks and white citizens showed up and they gave me a library card. It says something about the distance we've come and the progress we've made in laying down the burden of race. I don't know how many of you have heard of Troy University. It was called Troy State when I was growing up, only 10 miles from my home. At the age of 17, 1957, I applied to go to the school, submitted my application, my high school transcript. I never heard a word from the school. So I wrote a letter to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I didn't tell my mother, my father, any of my sisters or brothers, any of my teachers. I told Dr. King I needed his help. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote me back, sent me a round-trip Greyhound bus ticket, and invited me to come to Montgomery to meet with him. In the meantime, I had been accepted at a little school in Nashville, Tennessee. So in September 1957, an uncle of mine gave me a $100 bill, more money than I ever had, gave me one of these big Foot Lockers, those upright trunks that you can open up, then bring it back together. They had the drawers that you can put things in. And then a compartment where you can hang. Any of you remember that? That Foot Locker? I still had that Foot Locker. It's big and old. But I boarded that bus, a Greyhound bus. And I put everything that I owned in that Foot Locker, except those chickens, and went off to school to Nashville. And after being in Nashville for a few weeks, I told one of my teachers that I'd been in contact with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. This teacher knew Dr. King. They both had studied at Morehouse College, the same school that Harry Johnson studied. And he informed Dr. King that I was in Nashville. Martin Luther King Jr. got back in touch and suggested when I was home for spring break to come and see him. So in March of 1958, by this time I'm 18 years old, My father drove me to the Greyhound bus station. I boarded the bus and traveled to Montgomery. And a young lawyer, I'd never seen a lawyer before, a young man by the name of Fred Gray, who had been a lawyer for Rosa Parks, for Dr. King and the Montgomery movement, and became our lawyer during the Freedom Rides and the march from Selma to Montgomery. Met me at the bus station and drove me to the First Baptist Church in downtown Montgomery, passed by the Reverend Ralph Abernathy, and ushered me into the office of the church. I saw Martin Luther King Jr. and Ralph Abernathy standing behind a desk. I was so scared. I didn't know what to say or what to do. And Dr. King said, "Are you the boy from Troy? Are you John Lewis?" And I said, "Dr. King, I am John Robert Lewis." I gave my whole name. And that was the beginning of my involvement with Martin Luther King Jr. And it changed my life forever. And I've not looked back. I had a discussion with my parents. They were so frightened when I got back home. They thought our house would be bombed, that we would lose the land. And so I continued to study in Nashville. So it was in Nashville that we started studying the way of peace, the way of love, the way of nonviolence, that we started sitting in. Be sitting there in an orderly, peaceful, nonviolent fashion, waiting to be served, and someone would come up and spit on us, or put lighted cigarettes out in our hair or down our backs, pour hot water, hot coffee, hot chocolate on us. We just stayed there, looking straight ahead. And Andrew Iden would tell you that the first time I was arrested on February 27, 1960, I just turned 20, he discovered a few weeks ago a photograph of my first arrest. In Nashville during the 60s and many other parts of the South, we wanted to sort of dress up, put on our Sunday best when we went to participate in a protest. I didn't have much or any money. I wanted a new suit. So I went to a used men's store in downtown Nashville, and I bought a suit. And I tell you how much a suit cost. It was $5. I wish I still had it. I don't know what I would do with it. I just don't know what I would do with it. But maybe I would give it to some museum, maybe the Smithsonian or someplace. I don't know. But I look good. If you come to Washington, we have a photograph of that suit, and I mean, being arrested, and you can see it. So I would invite any of you who want to be in Washington anytime to come by my congressional office. It looked like a working museum. But we didn't give up. We didn't give in. We kept the faith. We kept our eyes on the prize. We didn't become bitter. We didn't become hostile. Many of us accepted the way of peace, the way of love, the way of nonviolence as a way of life, as a way of living. So during the 60s, I was arrested 40 times, left beaten. Just think, in 1961, the same year that President Barack Obama was born, black people and white people couldn't leave together on a bus or a train with white people seated together traveling through the South, through Virginia, through North Carolina, through South Carolina, through Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, on our way to New Orleans. Many people came from the state of California during the Freedom Rides. They came to Selma. 50 years ago this summer, many came to Mississippi. I'm going to cut it short and leave some time for Andrew. But during the March on Washington, I was the youngest speaker. I spoke number 6. Dr. King spoke number 10. There was 10 of us. Out of the 10 people that spoke that day, I'm the only one still around. When the March on Washington was over, President Kennedy invited us all back down to the White House. He stood in the door of the Oval Office greeting each one of us. And he kept saying, he was beaming like a proud father. He kept saying, "You did a good job, you did a good job." And when he got to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., he said, "And you had a dream." That was my last time seeing President Kennedy. Those of us that organized the march, the leadership, we emerged black and white as a circle of trust, a band of brothers and sisters. But 18 days after the march on Washington was a terrible bombing of the church in Birmingham where 4 little girls were killed on a Sunday morning. Because of what happened, we intensified our efforts to gain the right to vote. Just think, in a state like Mississippi, in 1964, the state had a black voting age population of more than 450,000 and only about 16,000 registered to vote. There was one county in the state of Alabama, Lowndes County, between Selma and Montgomery. The county was more than 80% African American, but there was not a single registered African American voter in the county. In some parts of the South, in Alabama and Mississippi, people were asked to count the number of bubbles in a bar of soap, count the number of jelly beans in a jar, interpret certain section of the Constitution of Mississippi or the state of Alabama or the U.S. Constitution. People were beaten, people were arrested, people were jailed. 3 young men, Andy Goodman, Mickey Sherney, and James Shaney, went out on a summer night of June 21st, 1964, to investigate the burning of an African-American church. The church was to be used for voter registration workshop. These 3 young men were detained by the sheriff, arrested, taken to jail, and later that evening, taken out of jail, turned over to the Klan, where they were beaten, shot, and killed. These 3 young men didn't die in the Middle East or Eastern Europe. They didn't die in Vietnam, Central South America. They died right here in our own country. And that's why I said to young people today, and those of us not so young, the vote is precious. In a democracy such as ours, it's almost sacred. And that's why we all must participate in the political process. President Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act of '64 on July 2nd. Dr. King received the Nobel Peace Prize in December 1964. He come back from Europe, hold a meeting at the White House, and said to President Johnson, "We need a voting rights act." President Johnson said, "I cannot do it. We don't have the votes in the Congress. Can I get it passed?" Dr. King made a decision to go to Selma and join the students in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. In Selma, only 2.1% of blacks of voting age were registered to vote. You can only attempt to register to vote on the first and third Mondays of each month, and you had to go down to the courthouse. And in Selma, you had a sheriff. It was a very big man, tall, he was mean, he got up mean, he would sleep mean, dream mean, he was just mean. He wore a gun on one side, a nightstick on the other side, and he carried an electric cap rodder in his hand, and he didn't use it on cows. Many of us were arrested by him for standing in line, encouraging people to stay in line, attempt to get their literacy test, attempt to pass that test, to become a registered voter. But on March 7, 1965, 600 of us attempted to walk from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama, 50 miles away, to dramatize to the state of Alabama, to the nation, and to the world that people wanted to participate in the democratic process. We were orderly. I was wearing a backpack before it became fashionable to wear backpacks. And in this backpack, I had 2 books. I wanted to have something to read in jail. I had 1 apple and 1 orange. I wanted to have something to eat. Now, 1 apple and 1 orange wouldn't last that long. And since I was going to be in jail with my friends and my colleagues and neighbors, I wanted to be able to brush my teeth, toothpaste and toothbrush. We get to the highest point on the Pettus Bridge, crossing the Alabama River. Down below, we saw a sea of blue, Alabama state troopers. Continued to walk. We came within hearing distance of the state troopers. A major spoke up and said, "I'm Major John Cloud of the Alabama State Troopers. This is an unlawful march and will not be allowed to continue. I give you 3 minutes to disperse and return to your homes or to your church." young man from Dr. King's organization leading the march with me, said, "Major, give us a moment to kneel and pray." And the major said, "Troopers, advance." You saw these guys putting on their gas masks. They came toward us, beating us with nightsticks and bullwhips, trampling us with horses and releasing the tear gas. I was the first person to be attacked. Hit in the head by a state trooper with a nightstick. Had a concussion at the bridge. I thought I was going to die. I thought I saw death. Next year would be the 50th anniversary of the march from Selma to Montgomery. Finally, we made it there. The next day, Dr. King came and said to me, "We'll make it from Selma to Montgomery. The Voting Rights Act will be passed." He issued a call for religious leaders to come to Selma. On that following Tuesday, more than 1,000 ministers, priests, rabbis, and nuns came and walked across that bridge. President Johnson made one of the most meaningful speeches than any American president had made in modern time, the whole question of civil rights, of voting rights. And in the end, near the end of that speech, after he had introduced the Voting Rights Act, he used the theme song of the civil rights movement, and he said, "And we shall overcome." I was sitting next to Martin Luther King Jr. in the home of a local family there in Selma, Alabama, as we witnessed and listened to Lyndon Johnson. When President Johnson said, "And we shall overcome," I looked at Dr. King, and tears came down his face, and we all cried a little to hear the President of the United States say, "We shall overcome." So because of the action and the marching feet of so many people, America's a different America. It's a better America. We're not there yet. We still have a distance to go. But in the final analysis, we all must keep in mind that we're one people, we're one family, we're one house. It doesn't matter whether we're black or white, or Latino, Asian American, or Native American. It doesn't matter whether we're straight or gay. We're all a member of the human family. We must look out for each other and care for each other. In closing, I said, thank you, Google, the Google family, for all that you do to bring this little spaceship, the members of the human race, a little closer together. One people, one family. And now let me pause and yield to my friend, my brother, and someone almost like he's my son, Andrew Iden, the co-author on March.
How do you follow that? Perhaps some of you are asking, why would John Lewis write a graphic novel? And it's a fair question. But what I hope to tell you real quickly is a story about how Dr. King himself used one as well. When I was on the campaign in 2008, I was going to a comic book convention afterwards, and I admitted it. I said it out loud to my colleagues, and they laughed at me. The congressman said, "Don't laugh. There was a comic book during the movement, and it was incredibly influential." And right off the bat, it started a conversation with me wondering, why doesn't John Lewis write a comic book? Why doesn't he tell his story? Because he's lived so much of the seminal moments of the movement. If they used the comic book once to help teach people about nonviolence, why can't we do it again? And at the same time, I went back to Washington after this campaign was over. I went to grad school at night and started working on my graduate thesis. And I decided to write it about Martin Luther King and the Montgomery story, this comic book. You might not know it because it is sort of one of those undertold stories, but what we found out was Dr. King edited it. It was endorsed by A. Philip Randolph, and it was used throughout the South by people like Jim Lawson, Congressman Lewis's mentor in Nashville, to educate and, in fact, inspire some of the earliest sit-ins. And so it seemed almost self-evident to me that perhaps we could do it again, that we're facing the same struggles. We see police brutality, attacks on voting rights. How do we get a young activist generation to step up again and fight that fight with us? There's three things you need in a movement. You need financing. You need adequate tools and strategy. And you need activists willing to give everything that they can. And it has to be young people. They're the most free. They're the most liberated. They don't have mortgages. They don't have families. They don't have kids. They're the only ones who can put themselves on the line as young radicals, as they called the congressman, for believing simply that a sixth grade education should not be a requirement to vote, as was proposed in the original Civil Rights Bill. So when I asked the congressman, why don't you write a comic book, he sort of looked at me and said, maybe not. But I kept asking and asking. And finally he said, okay, let's do it, but only if you write it with me. And it was one of those challenges in my life that you rarely get. And if you let it go, you've missed this incredible opportunity, but more importantly, you've perhaps missed your own life's mission. And I couldn't do that. I grabbed onto it, and for 5 years, Harry knows this, he saw me at night and on weekends worrying about that dadgum comic book. Because that's what we had, a day job. And so we were doing it at night, on the phone, when we could get together. And we put our heart and soul into it. It grew from 1 book to 3, because what do you leave out? Whose story don't you tell? What key part of the civil rights movement is not worth telling? And lo and behold, it started to seem like it was going to work. There were some surreal moments along the way. One of them was I was on the pilgrimage with the congressman, and I got on an elevator, and there is Ethel Kennedy, Robert Kennedy's widow, and John Siegenthaler, who was Robert Kennedy's aide during the Freedom Rides and later the publisher of the Nashville Tennessean. And this is a theme. Again, I was young and didn't know any better. And so I asked, I said, I'm sorry to bother you, but I just thought you'd want to know. You're in a comic book that I'm working on with the congressman. And Ethel Kennedy looked up at me with those beautiful eyes, and she just said, that's nice, dear. So it was a tremendous thrill when she called me about 1.5 years later to say that March Book 1 would be the first graphic novel ever to receive the Robert F. Kennedy Book Award. The moment, though, I think, when we knew that this book was really going to be something special, that it was actually going to work as a tool for nonviolence and teaching another generation, was right after we had the first advance copies out. And I got a phone call from a reporter. And he said, I don't usually do this, but I gave your book to my 9-year-old son. And he's gone and put on his Sunday suit, and now he's marching around my house demanding equality for everyone. Imagine if we could develop a social consciousness in every 9-year-old in America. What that would mean for the next generation and what they would be capable of doing, particularly if they were well-informed and capable of using nonviolence in a disciplined and orderly way. It's not just a philosophy, it's a tactic. And it's the only tactic that truly will work. There was a reviewer in France, and he used a phrase that has stuck with me. He called it a weapon of mass instruction. I never thought I would be able to participate in creating something like that. But as we stand here now, about 13 months after it's released, the Washington Post said it needs to be in every school and library in America. NPR called it the next mouse. I call it beginner's luck. But it's because John Lewis's story is so important. We see a generation of young people who don't know how to make a difference sometimes. And particularly with all the resources we have with technology. And we have to teach them that nonviolence is the viable path forward. I handle tech and telecom issues in the congressman's office. And I also do his social media, so I'm basically head nerd. And we're taking over the world. I mean, we have to admit now, we almost have a hegemonic state. We're winning. But what I'm constantly struggling with is the concept of what would Dr. King or what would Gandhi have done with these tools? I mean, it's a profound question, and more importantly, where is Google Organize? Where is Google March? these technologies allow people to be reached in such a broad way that we've never had access before. And we're just starting to see the beginning of it. You think about the Tahrir Square revolution. I'll draw this connection for you. It was Facebook that helped them organize, but it was Martin Luther King and the Montgomery story translated into Arabic that was distributed just before they started organizing. So if we can connect those pieces, if we can get them to ask the questions and then use the technology to organize, the potential to remake our society is limitless. And I think that's exactly what you're trying to do here. So that's why I appreciate you having us and letting us bring March, because we want to be that first step so that the young people ask the questions and then they use your tools to make it a reality. So I'll be brief. I just thank you guys so much for having me. This is a real thrill. I was in college and started a television station using Google Video back in the day. It's a real honor to be here. Thank you guys so much.
Congressman, what really struck me was the story that you mentioned about your father having been a tenant farmer and buying the land for $300 that's still in your family today. And when I think about that, I think about the incredible upward mobility that's afforded to people and to families by being able to go from working just for their monthly income to actually generating value for themselves and their family. So my question for you is, what do you see as the biggest opportunity for the federal government to help people who currently are only living paycheck to paycheck to actually be able to develop some of that equity for themselves and their family for the long term?
Well, I think the federal government need to do more to help people that have been left out and left behind. Can make small loans available with a very little interest, maybe in some instances, probably not any interest. People just need a little help, just need a helping hand to help make people a little more independent. We don't do enough. We should see that every child receive the best possible education, especially in poor neighborhoods in rural America. That's why I've taken such a strong stand for comprehensive immigration reform, to help people move up and that people will not live in a state of want, a state of need. You know, we are one of the wealthiest countries on the planet, and we need to use some of our resources to help and not continue to make more bombs and missiles and guns.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Congressman and Andre, for coming. I'm actually going to Ferguson at the end of the week to support a group there called Amplify Ferguson. It's a team of media people who are using technology to give voices to the people outside of this regular news cycle now that no one's really focusing on people in Ferguson. I'm helping with some civic engagement workshops that they have on Saturday. I myself am not trained in civic engagement. I just was really drawn to this cause. And so I'm wondering from you all, what do you think about communities like Ferguson and Ferguson? What's missing there in terms of how people are using government or getting involved? Honestly, what would you teach if you were me when I go there at this weekend? And what do you think is most effective for youth versus adults in that community?
Andrew may want to respond, but I would say prepare yourself. Before we've been on any sit-in, Freedom Ride, the march from Selma to Montgomery, the Mississippi Summer Project, we studied. And today that's all type of literature. Watch Eyes on the Prize. There's an NBC white paper that came out many, many years ago with the late Chat Huntley narrating the white paper about the Nashville sit-in story. And in the book, you see the do's and don'ts. Back then, we didn't have a website, Facebook. We didn't have Google, no. We didn't have a fax machine. We had the old mimeograph machine. But we used what we had to change America. You have to be creative. I think in Ferguson, people got to become active in the political process. It doesn't make sense that so few people get out and vote there. As I've said many, many times to my colleagues and to people all around the country, that the vote is powerful. It is precious. It's almost sacred. And we have to use it to get things done. If more young people, more minority, more women get out and turn out, all of us just turn out and show up and cast a vote, we can remake America, make it better for everybody.
I think the most important thing to keep in mind is to look to our past and see what worked before. I think it would be very helpful if many of the organizations there modeled themselves after the Nashville student movement, which was largely believed to be the most disciplined and orderly of the individual student movements. Read Emerson, read Thoreau, read Gandhi, study nonviolence, because the most important part is the details, right? Where is the statement of demands? Right? Before they left on the Freedom Rides, they mailed a specific letter to the Attorney General, to the President, and to the press with their specific demands for what they were trying to achieve. Right? There is a way that has worked in the past, and it's going to work again. We just have to make sure that everybody knows how to do it. That's why we're doing March. That's why you should use Martin Luther King, the Montgomery story, or March, or these tools. I mean, we're not doing something that hasn't worked before. And as you look out there, you see people who are thirsty. They want to know. They want to know, how do I do this? And we just got to get it into their hands.
Thank you. And just so you know, I'm going to try to get some of these books to give out while I'm down there as well.
Great, thank you.
Good.
Hello. Thanks for coming. My question is about the forms of racism that are a little bit more harder to detect, more insidious. So, I mean, there's instances like Ferguson, which are like forms of violence that we can physically see. But there seems to be like a lot of, and I can call it like quote unquote invisible racism, structural conditions or economic stratification that makes life on certain minorities very difficult. And so, how do things like nonviolence per se actually prevent things like structural blockages that prevent people from voting in the first place? And how do people like us who are privileged do something substantive to actually help people who are structurally disadvantaged?
You have a voice. You're smart. You have the ability. You have the capacity. You could use the new technology. You could communicate. And you have to help inform and educate people. When Martin Luther King Jr. would be preaching sometime in Atlanta at his father's church, later when they co-pastored, he would be preaching, and his father would say, Daddy King, we call him, would say, make it plain, son, make it plain. And he just kept saying, make it plain. I think you can help make it plain. People like to hide stuff, like to hide it in the dark corner or someplace under the American rug. You have to help bring it out into the open, into the light. So in a sense, why would members of Congress and 200 citizens go and deliberately court getting arrested? We want to put a face on it. We want to make it real. We want to say to the Speaker of the House, you bring this bill to the floor. The Senate passes it. We have the votes to pass it. So you have to help put the spotlight on it. And just one day will not necessarily do it. I tell people all the time that the struggle is not a struggle that lasts for a few days, a few weeks, a few years. It is a struggle of a lifetime to create what Dr. King called a beloved community, or to create an American community, a world community at peace with itself. Be creative.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
Just want to thank you both for coming out. My question pertains to sort of piggybacking off of other people's questions, we talked a lot about how working at a place like Google sort of empowers us to have the ability to send out a message or whatever about, bringing the country together and all that stuff. But Congressman Lewis, you probably know this better than anyone. I feel like within the past, 10, 20 years, it's actually become more fragmented, the messages, because, before, 20 years ago, there was only 3 news channels you can go to, ABC, NBC, and CBS. It had to be a more centrist view that was being displayed. It had to reach out and appeal to everyone. Now, with everything fragmented, you have your Fox News and your MSNBC and your Drudge Report and so on and so forth. Everyone is sort of siloing themselves in a particular message. There was a lot of reports about the difference in African-American responses to the events of Ferguson versus white responses. And one of the key insights into that was, Caucasian Americans mostly hang out with Caucasian Americans and therefore only reinforce the views that they already had. And so, with that being said, how, even though the technology and the opportunity is there, it seems like it's being used for the opposite of bringing the country together. It's used to pull people apart. So sort of how do we actually go about fixing those gaps and those divides, given that everybody has an opportunity to source to, find the true message, but also listen to the message that they want to hear and sort of try to reconcile both of those facts?
Well, I said to Andrew and I said to some of my colleagues in the Congress from time to time, I said, in the Congress, we need to conduct some nonviolent workshops, just bringing members of Congress together. Because the American people think we're so divided, and to a larger extent, we are divided. So one of the things I've been doing with an organization called Faith in Politics for the past 15 years, taking members of Congress, taking business executives, taking students and others to Selma, to Montgomery, to Birmingham, to meet some of the people, to meet some of the foot soldiers, to meet the family of the 4 little girls that were bombed and killed. To go, and you have people, Southerners, black, white, you have people living in the Midwest or the West Coast who had never traveled in the South. And they go and walk through these churches, through this historic site, they meet people, and they are changed. Or to have someone who beat you 50 years ago and then come to your office in Washington and say, I'm sorry. I want to apologize. Will you forgive me? And to have a chief of police in Montgomery, Alabama, almost 2 years ago, a little more than a year ago, a young guy who was not even born, said to me, Congressman, when you came here in 1961, more than 50 years ago, our police department was not kind to you and your colleagues. We withdrew. He was not a police officer. He was not even born. But he said, we withdrew. We let an angry mob beat you. He said, but our police department today is better. Before anyone become a member of this police department, they must know something about what happened in Montgomery, what happened in Selma, what happened in Birmingham. He went on talking. This chief is white. His deputy is African-American. The young deputy didn't even know the chief was going to go down that road. And then before it was over, the chief said something like, Congressman, because of my admiration for you and your colleagues and for what you did, I'm going to take off my badge. I'm going to give it to you. I'm going to present you my badge. That's what he said. And I said, Chief, you can't do that. You're the chief of police. You need your badge. And the young African-American deputy lost it. He just started crying because he didn't know his chief was going to do that. And then the whole audience, even members of Congress, Democrats and Republicans, black and white, Latinos and Asian American, all sitting there crying. So sometimes we have to find ways, sometimes it may not intention, but it tend to reach people and catch them in the gut.
Well, that's not a question that wasn't asked during the civil rights movement. When Dr. King wrote a letter from a Birmingham jail, there were whites in the community who said, why are you agitating now? Why are you doing this? And there were differing perspectives based on race. But I think what we need to do today is we need to look at some of these issues where they stretch clear across racial boundaries, and are in fact, these social depression mechanisms like student loans. I mean, you've got a generation of young people growing up with more debt than they ever have. And the federal government is profiting off of those loans. And they're using that money to pay for war. And that's not right. But I think if you started off and found a common ground like that stretches across all groups that are suffering from it, and you did as LBJ told Martin Luther King to do in the winter of 1964, and make Congress do something about it. If they all organize around it. You see Occupy, they've paid down $4 million in debt. Let's make Congress pay down $4 billion in debt. And then find that common ground, and then build from there. You really could change things, but you got to find that common ground.
Thank you very much.
Hello. Congressman John Lewis, I thank you so much not only for being here, but for everything that you've done, which has allowed me to be here. And Andrew, as a former middle school teacher, I thank you for creating something which would be so relevant and so easily accessible for my former students. So since we are here at Google and thinking through for my students, I'm thinking through the lens of my kids, this is great. However, it's it may not be the most accessible for them, just buying the book, et cetera. So what is Google's or what would you want Google's responsibility to be in creating a platform or sharing the miniseries that you've created, and also what are your plans for other books for capturing our history?
Well, so this is just the first one, right? And each one has a different lesson. This first one is to introduce nonviolence as a tactic. The next one we deal with how you make a movement a national movement, right? That's what the Freedom Rides did. And then how you deal with that once it does get on the national stage, which is the March on Washington, and how you deal with the response from it, which is the bombing of the church and the death of the 4 little schoolgirls on September 15th, 1963, just 3 weeks after the March on Washington, right? The way I think Google should participate in this is sharing information, all right? I mean, I don't think people adequately understand how much governance goes on at the local level around them. Right? Imagine if you just had a database where you could just simply look up, this is where I live and this is what I care about, and then you saw every local meeting that was happening around there, and how the legislation or the bills that they were considering, it was made plain, and it was shown to each person, and then they could go to the meeting and have their opportunity to speak. Sure, you'd frustrate some county local officials. The meetings would go a little longer, but that's what they signed up for, and that's what they should be doing. And if a middle schooler of all things shows up and says, I still think that's not right, I dare an elected official to argue with them. You've got so many resources, and information above all else is the most important thing. Make this society more informed. Let them know what is going on in their community in a way that, as Daddy King says, as the congressman has pointed out, makes it plain. And we'll keep doing the books to show them the history and the tactics that were used, and you give them the information and the tools to do it again.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Congressman Lewis, Mr. Eisen, thank you so much for being here. Congressman, it's such an honor to hear you speak and have you impart these lessons from history that still impact us definitely today. My question has to do with a couple of things. The first part is that in light of the events in Ferguson, as we've discussed, and reports that show that literally hundreds of African Americans specifically are targeted because of race and unjustifiably killed, and these actions go unprosecuted. And as you spoke of the Voting Rights Act, the Supreme Court recently struck down Section 4, one of the most important aspects and most of the important enforcement aspects of the Voting Rights Act. In light of these steep backward steps, as what I would see them, happening in our modern day and our day of progress, and in light of all the media attention around it, in light of technology used to raise awareness about these issues, there are literally millions of tweets, thousands of articles about these issues all the time. In light of all of that, we see very little reform and very little structural change despite this awareness. So in your mind, in what you've seen in your experience, what is that missing link between awareness and action and actual reform? My second part to that is, in my mind, I see our elected officials and the federal government, our agencies and state governments and those attendant structures as that middle link between the public and reform, legislative reform, what have you. Are you seeing any progress in those fronts in your position as an elected official in Congress that can give us hope that maybe this action, this awareness will actually result in some structural progress?
Well, I truly believe that the vote is powerful. I was in the chamber when the Supreme Court debated and considered the Voting Rights Act, Section 4. And when that decision came down, I felt like crying, but I wouldn't cry. It meant everything to me. I gave a little blood on that bridge for the right to vote, almost died. And I think there are forces in America that want to take us back to another period. But there are also forces must speak up and speak out and say we made too much progress and we're not going back. The struggle is an ongoing struggle. You know, Ferguson was a few weeks ago, and we're not there, but we will get there. That's why this election is so important. It is a must. If we fail to turn out I don't need to say this to people in California, but in some other parts of America, we fail to turn out, then we can go backward, and we must continue to go forward and put people in places where they will speak up and speak out and organize. I've said all along that I think the American people are too quiet, just too quiet, too complacent. If this is 1960 or 1965, there'll be hundreds and thousands of people in the streets of America. After the beating of us in Selma on March 7, 1965, there was a major demonstration in every major city in America on 80 college campuses. Overnight. It happened on a Sunday. By that Tuesday, people were sitting in the White House, the Department of Justice. Even the president said his children couldn't sleep. His two daughters couldn't sleep because people were singing, "We Shall Overcome." We have to get out there again and push and pull and have some creative tension. So you have to go out and organize. I don't know, if we didn't have what you have today, I don't know what we would have been able to accomplish. We got to use these tools, use these instruments, use the information to recreate America.
Thank you.
Congressman Andrew, thank you both for your life of service. My name is Seth Marbin. I work here on the Googlers Give team, and we help employees volunteer and give away their money. And I used to work at City Year, and thank you for your service.
City Year jacket.
Yeah, you're an incredible supporter of City Year and national service, so thank you for that. In the spirit of City Year, we carried backpacks, we wore a uniform, and I'm curious, you mentioned the backpack that you wore over in the march over the bridge. I've been over that bridge. It's amazing to sort of walk in your footsteps and see what you've been able to accomplish. But I'm curious, what would you put in your backpack today if you were going out to lead that march? And Andrew, for you, I'd love to hear more about organizing.
What instruments would I have, Andrew, in that backpack?
What would be in that? You mentioned an apple, an orange, a couple books. What would be in that backpack today?
Well, growing up the way I grew up, we didn't have a telephone. We didn't have a subscription to a newspaper. We were so poor. But my grandfather had one, and each day when he would finish reading his newspaper, we would get his newspaper and read it. Some of our neighbors had what we call party line. I would have a telephone in that backpack. I would be able to communicate. And probably have maybe a small computer or something. Something. And Andrew would teach me all of the way here's the man. Andrew, what would you advise me to have in it?
I think you just need a phone these days.
Yeah, just a phone.
You can start a revolution with this little device.
But to be very frank, I wish I had the backpack back. People ask me all the time, what happened to your backpack? What happened to your trench coat? people from the Smithsonian, from the Library of Congress. We don't know what happened to it.
And Andrew, I'd love to hear more about the tools that you mentioned, Google Organize and Google March. If you can share any more specifics on what those might look like, what are we missing at this point?
So, when we get on social media, the message can spread like that, right? We did the mugshot tweet a couple months ago, and it was like 50,000 retweets, right? Because people were so shocked that it was only 53 years ago that somebody went to Parchman prison for using a white restroom, right? These tools need to dramatize these same struggles that are going on today. I think when we shine a bright light, the world light, if you will, on some of these injustices, then people are much more willing to act. But above all else, we've got to get people to show up. We've got to find a way to get people to let their presence be their voice. We have a generation now who's almost bordering on becoming armchair activists. They post things and they complain that they think it's wrong, but when it comes down to showing up and putting pressure on your elected officials, because let's be honest, most people in Congress don't move without pressure. It's been that way for a long time. It's not new to this Congress. You have too few John Lewises. And so we have to get people to show up. That was the point of the March on Washington. And look how well it worked. Maybe it sparked a backlash, but in the end, it dramatized and helped continue the efforts. More importantly, look at the Mississippi Freedom Summer. Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman died so that we could have a Civil Rights Act and a Voting Rights Act. These people showed up. They went to schools. They educated themselves. They organized. So we have to make a way to put these tools in the hands of everybody. First, the lessons of nonviolence, the history of nonviolence, how it was used successfully, and then take it to that next step and help people show up, help people mobilize. It was just a few weeks ago that we had a college student put out a tweet with a hashtag that garnered 3,000 people marching through the streets of Atlanta in solidarity of Ferguson, including Congressman Lewis.
And so many people thought I was there. They thought I was in Ferguson. They saw me walking in the march, holding up my arm. But that's a good point.
And getting people to show up. But I think also information. We don't understand and we don't fully appreciate how much governance actually happens at the local level, right? I mean, we're fighting a fight right now to get people registered to vote. And that's a local decision first at the county level and then at the state level. So how do you pressure a Secretary of State to recognize valid voter applications when they know that it will mean that they will lose an election? How do you pressure your countywide officials to make it easier to register and vote? Right? I mean, we all vote on a Tuesday and nobody gets the day off and we say everybody has the opportunity to vote. But the fact is that most people have a job and they're tired when they get home and they have to be into the polling place by 7 o'clock. I never get home by 7 o'clock. But Congressman Lewis says, take time, go vote, right? We should make it a national holiday. We should pressure Congress to make it a national holiday. We should make voting as easy as drinking a glass of water. Sorry, I stole your line.
That's okay. It's okay.
Thank you both for your service.
Thank you.
Okay.
I either have 1,000 questions or none, but I wanted to say thank you so much for what you've done for all of us, because none of us are free unless we're all free. And I'm old enough. I was a young teenager when you were marching on that bridge, and I remember seeing the news stories and not really understanding. And just thank you very much for your courage and all your efforts on behalf of all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Lewis and Andrew. So one of the things I feel of my generation is that we actually feel the vote is a pretty ineffective tool for getting our voices heard. And given that we're in Silicon Valley, where do you see technology playing a role to do more than just spreading information, as in like being sort of armchair activists and, being able to play a role despite having a full-time job? What are the things you think that as technologists we can all do to create more impact?
Well, I think it's time for us to start the conversation about online voting, online voter registration, and making it a national idea. It's oftentimes antiquated rules with a cumbersome way of doing it to get people to show up. And we make it too hard. We have all this technology. We should find new ways to use it in the voting process. It can be secure if we work hard enough. If Diebold can advocate for using electronic voting machines in their election, then perhaps it's time for us to look at it for everybody online, as opposed to just the touch screens, because there was so much controversy with that they supported it. But I think there's a flip side of that. Mm-hmm. We can't advocate that until everybody has access to the internet. Right? I think it's time for us to call. Are you familiar with the Lifeline program?
No.
It's something the FCC does so that folks who live below the poverty line can have access to a cell phone. Right? I think we need to expand that to include data. Right? So that everybody can have access to information. If you're poor, if you're under the poverty line, you just get a phone with data on it. Right? That's how people get their information. How are we expecting people to be informed if we don't give them the tools to be informed? We're cutting library budgets at a record pace, which used to be the only place they could get free access to the internet. So we're going to take it away from there. We've got to push to give it to them somewhere else. And I think, part of it too is that you're not going to fix everything in a day. And we're going to have to find small things to build momentum. So if it's expanding the Lifeline program to include data for folks living under the poverty line and giving everybody access to a phone with data, so be it. That's better to spend our money on that than to spend it on bombs.
I think all of us can agree.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Lewis, for coming, and Andrew. My question is about truth and reconciliation. I know that a lot of the problems here between different people they have different conflicting views about what really happened. And I think that people are afraid to step forward and say what happened in the 60s, what happened with the lynchings. And so there's this distrust that kind of continues on. So what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I believe deeply. I believe deeply that's where we must move as a people and as a nation. There's still a lot of hurt and pain. I know individuals in the African-American community, the book came out about lynching, small book. There was a exhibit in different parts of America. People I know in the African-American community couldn't go to a museum or to a church or to a school. And there were some colleges and universities in the South were afraid to display. They thought something would happen. But we need to face the truth. It did happen. It did happen. So you cannot hide it. Face it. And I think South Africa has one up on us. They did a better job of bringing people together. And that's what we've been trying to do on a limited basis in parts of the American South. In Alabama, when we go back to Montgomery and to Selma and to Birmingham, let the people that was on the other side, black and white, let them come together. Going back to Birmingham on some of these trips, on one occasion when I was back there, a white gentleman said, middle-aged, said, I want to speak to John Lewis. And someone said, he's right here. And he said, Mr. Lewis, I want to apologize to you on behalf of all of the white people of Alabama for what we did. We need to get there. People in the Congress, we're afraid. We're afraid to issue an apology. The Congress, the National Assembly of the United States of America is afraid to say we're sorry for slavery. We're sorry for the system of segregation and racial discrimination. So the legacy is still there, it's linger.
And how it affects today, and what's going on today and how it connects. I think a lot of people don't make that connection between slavery, racism, post-Reconstruction, and what's happening in our cities today. In Ferguson, I think people just don't make that connection. Also, I want to say that there's definitely people who are willing to stand up because, Occupy was amazing. I was totally blown away that they were able to get so many people together across the city. I think they probably lacked a message or a concrete message. And also, I just want to say thank you. I know I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you, so thank you.
Thank you. There's an exhibit at the Library of Congress, should continue to next September, 2015. Unreal, unbelievable. So it may travel, but it's a complete history of the whole struggle from the days of slavery.
I have to catch it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Congressman Lewis. You've talked a lot about low voter participation and turnouts, and I feel like there have been a lot of deliberate attempts to breed cynicism and the feeling that our vote doesn't matter, particularly for people who are more likely to support equality. And one of the ways that I've seen this done is by splitting up elections. Like, I remember a conversation I had with a Republican strategist once who talked about the deliberate strategy to hold special elections and things like that because there's lower voter turnouts in those elections, and those people who vote tend to skew older and skew wealthier and skew more Republican. And even in a lot of local elections are held at weird off times. And I've missed more than one election when I moved to a new city because it was there was nothing in any of the media that I get that let me know that the election happened until there was a news story 3 days later about who won. And even when I have voted sometimes, by the time you get down to, family court judge, it's my question is, why is this even an elected position, much less having a sense of who would be the better candidate here. So my question is, what can we do to counteract the forces that want to discourage voter turnout through spreading out elections and to help it be easier for people to become informed voters?
I think it's important for local partisan or non-partisan organizations and groups like the League of Women Voters, good government groups, to lobby, to organize and get legislation passed to change the type of voting. But my philosophy is also that you should vote in every election, even if it's only the dog catcher. You want to vote for the dog catcher or vote against the dog catcher? But vote. It's just that important. In our young people, we have to get people in the habit of participating. And minorities in the South, in the habit of voting, in the habit of participating. And we should take our young children, when we go to the polls, take them to the polls with us and let them punch and do whatever you do so they can see it, become a part of their existence.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, this may be a bit more of a statement than a question. First off, I wanted to say that I'm a very recent Californian, having moved here 2 years ago and spent the preceding 20 years in Atlanta, and was extremely proud to have had you as my congressman.
Well,
for
thank you
a
very much. I
great deal
appreciate
of
it.
that time.
Well, I tried to do my best as a member of Congress. This young man here said I've been here since he was 3.
And I wanted to thank you all for drawing the sort of line of history because, well, my wife is older than I am, and she was involved in the Vietnam movement, protests against Vietnam. My father, we lived in Texas, and he sat in at lunch counters. But one of my great honors as part of the continuing movement, I personally met my wife protesting U.S. involvement in Central America in the 80s, was to be able to meet representatives of the Abraham Lincoln brigades from the Spanish Civil War. And I was made acutely aware of sort of the legacy of the movements of the 30s. And so, I mean, it's a continuous movement, and I'm proud to be part of this river in some form, and I'm very honored to meet a giant in that. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. Thank you.